Rppfm, you're tuned up to. It's Wednesday, and great to have your company for Peninsula Talks across the Mornington Peninsula, across Frankston. Of course, we're streaming on our app as well. And if you haven't done so already, download that app because it's going to give you great insights and great comfort. In these difficult times as we come out of COVID-19, who knows, by tomorrow we might have some better news. Let's have a look at some of the issues, some of the environmental issues that have been, well, confronting us here on the Mornington Peninsula for the past 12 months or so. AGL, you might remember, the terminal development on Western Port, Ryman's plans to develop the old Ansett property in Mount Eliza, and the slow burner Hillview's plans to reactivate its quarry activity on Arthur's Seat. Now, a new Melbourne University research paper on strategic planning for Melbourne's green wedges has been highly critical of the Ross Trust's proposed new quarry at Arthur's Seat. So I figured it might be time to speak to the authors of this survey and this paper, Associate Professor Janet Stanley and also her husband, Professor John Stanley, Principal Research Fellows at Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute, University of Melbourne. To the both of you, welcome to Rppfm, welcome to Peninsula Talks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Brendon.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Janet and John Stanley. Firstly, Janet, to you, obviously, can you just give us a bit of a background? How did you get involved, and why is it necessary for you guys to have a look at and check out what Hillview have got planned?
Yes, certainly. The paper originated from a submission that we put in response to the Victorian government's review of agriculture, particularly in green wedge zones around Melbourne. So that's where it started off, and we began to sort of get a bit of steam as a result of that and decided we'd write the paper as well, because it just seemed that their review of agriculture isolates the issues sort of one at a time, whereas really green wedges, we believe, ought to be considered along with all their purposes for the green wedges. And we were particularly concerned about the proposed quarry that the Ross Trust is planning for the middle of the Arthur. It's in their private land, but it's in the middle of the Arthur Seat State Park on a highly valuable environmental area. And we believe these things need to be taken into account in these green wedge zones.
Indeed, and the green wedge, of course, has been sort of very much front and centre of many considerations over the last little while, and people are very concerned about it just being nibbled away at on the periphery as well. But John, Hillview, they have some form here. I mean, historically, of course, they've been quarrying in this area for a number of years. Why is this new proposal of concern?
Well, I think it's a whole range of issues have come together at the same time, Brendon. You've got some fairly big picture issues that are going on in the background, in particular Australia's biodiversity crisis. I mean, one thing Australia's been really good at is actually wiping out a lot of its species compared to other countries. And at the same time, we're getting increasing knowledge and understanding of how important nature is for human health. If you put those two issues alongside Melbourne's rapid population growth, then you find that the areas really close to Melbourne are coming under increasing pressure. The biodiversity in those areas is coming under increasing pressure just at the time when we need to be protecting and restoring our biodiversity. And that's what really has changed since the time the first quarry was started, umpteen years ago. I mean, when R.E. Ross started his trust, he talked about the prevailing circumstances at the time. Well, the prevailing circumstances in 1970 are nothing like the prevailing circumstances today. We didn't have a biodiversity crisis then. We didn't have the erosion of nature that we're seeing. Melbourne wasn't going through the roof on the fringes the way it has been recently, and all these things are putting huge pressure on the scarce biodiversity. And so the proposition in our paper is that in the green wedge areas, biodiversity is so important, both for its ecosystem services and human health, that we have to preserve it, particularly the high-valued places. And unfortunately for the Ross Trust and Hillview quarries, the site they've chosen has very high biodiversity values and simply shouldn't be used for a quarry.
So, Janet, if I can move on to you then, what are those, what have you identified as important to protect in our habitat?
Well, it's a unique area of land. There's very little continuous native vegetation left on the peninsula, and this is something of part of the 18% that actually is. We undertook a biological survey of the land. Unfortunately, the Rock Trust wouldn't allow us to do it on the land, but limited review that we had a professional person undertake said that at least 28 species of endangered flora and fauna were present on this land. So what you walk through it is just beautiful, and there's very, very old trees that were here before white settlement came to the area. The same tree is still there. So it's a unique place. It has many forms of ecosystems, highly varied, highly biodiverse, and some of the species are listed on the federal list for conservation, such as the powerful owl and the swift parrot, which is nearly extinct. So it's of concern that this particular area might be lost to a huge hole the size of the Botanical Gardens of Melbourne.
We're talking with Associate Professor Janet Stanley and Professor John Stanley, her husband, Principal Research Fellow, Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute at the University of Melbourne, on a research paper on the proposed quarry expansion down at Arthur's Seat. John, can I be a little bit of a devil's advocate for the moment then? Hillview have been staunch members of the Mornington Peninsula community. They've turned over millions of dollars in profit in philanthropic and civil-minded projects. This will be gone to us.
No, that's not correct. If you look at the financial position of the Ross Trust and Hillview Quarries, they've got ample reserves. They don't need this quarry to continue providing a satisfactory level of support to the community for the sorts of purposes they were set up to do. And we'd also argue that one of the main purposes that the Ross Trust claims that it's in existence to achieve is to support nature. Well, we wonder how you can possibly do that by destroying it. So, the asset position is well over $50 million, and from the earnings from an asset base of that scale, you can run a very successful foundation doing a number of the things that the Trust has done over the years and done well. It's a shame they're blotting their copybook with this particular proposal right now.
Okay, here's another one for you then. Your study does not take into account the economic or the employment benefits to the local community, and to have a stone resource in our midst is going to have has an important bearing on what we can do.
Yes, well, one of the good things the Victorian government has done, it did this 5 years ago, was carry out a strategic assessment of future demand and supply for quarry products. And that report, which was done by PwC for the state government, demonstrated unambiguously that Victoria's got ample supplies of granite, in fact sufficient to last for the rest of this century without the quarry that's been proposed by the Ross Trust. And then if you look at the issue of employment, the Hillview and Ross Trust are telling us that the quarry is going to involve around 30 jobs. The research we've done, and this is written up in the paper, says that tourism and lifestyle type activities are responsible for about 10,000 jobs on the peninsula. So if this industrial scale quarry was to cause a loss of 0.4% of the jobs in tourism and lifestyle type activities, would in fact be a net loss of jobs to the peninsula.
And one more for you then, John. Your study doesn't take into account the rehabilitation of the environment undertaken by Hillview post their quarrying activities.
Well, that's a fair point, and the reason is they don't do much. The quarry, the Pioneer Quarry they're proposing to develop now, and the land around it, they were supposed to rehabilitate that some time ago. That hasn't happened. And a lot of the planting that they've actually done is sallow wattle, which is a weed species, and there's been pine planting which has escaped into the national park, into the state park. So if you look at some of the activities that would be called in inverted commas rehabilitation, they've probably been environmentally damaging to the area rather than in any sense rehabilitation.
Professor John Stanley speaking to us from Melbourne University, Associate Professor Janet Stanley. Janet, so obviously you've done a great deal of thinking about this and researched this whole matter. What is going to happen to your findings? Where are they going to go, and who's going to read and act on them?
Well, we hope people will read the paper that we've written and just consider these issues and the choices that are there to be made. But the community has shown down the Mornington Peninsula has shown considerable problems with the quarry, and we do have now over 60,000 signatures of people in the community asking this quarry to be stopped. So we will be talking with politicians, and at the present, this proposal is with an environment effect statement. So we are contributing and putting in submissions when we're able to, which is not till a couple of weeks before there's a panel hearing about this around the decision that will be made by Minister Wynne. So we're very involved, and hopefully will encourage members of the community to understand exactly what this quarry means for the area.
Brendon, as I understand it, the Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute also intends to send this paper to members of Parliament and their staff, so they'll actually have access to the paper. Hopefully that will inform their reflection on the issue.
So ultimate determination then, John, will be Richard Wynne's, will it? And he'll make that having taken due counsel from a number of inputs?
Well, the environmental effect statement that the project's going through at the moment eventually ends up with Minister Wynne, and he'll be the decision maker on that. There'll be a process that reviews that environmental effects report, or the series of reports, when they're handed down, and the local community is gearing up to respond to those reports when the time comes. But then it's a matter for the Minister what his decision is. And I think the really important point we're trying to make in the paper is that these issues shouldn't be taken one by one. You really need to look much more strategically at the green wedges and highlight those uses that, if you sacrifice them today, are gone forever. If you decide today not to quarry, the rock's not going anywhere. But if you decide today to cut down a 300 or 400-year-old tree, that's it. Planting a few more trees today is going to take a hell of a long time to replace that sort of vegetation. The reality is you can't replace it.
If you don't like the decision that Richard Wynne makes, what recourse do you have?
Officially, we don't have any, but it'll be. I don't think we will still argue our case then ongoing.
Where to from here then? Obviously there's a lot of local feeling about this. I've seen the bumper stickers, quarry off and so on around the Mornington Peninsula. As you say, 60,000 signatories. A lot of passion being felt down on the Mornington Peninsula at the moment.
Yes, there certainly is. And as John says, the reason that the university is interested is because we're part of the Sustainability Institute, and we're very keen to get the bigger picture around this and the policy implications, and the fact that it would appear that a lot of the legislation on green wedges needs to be reviewed and revised.
Well, John, this has sort of come to the forefront as well in recent months as well, the whole designation of the green wedge issue down around the Mornington Peninsula, of course, and our categorisation as regional versus metro has been another big argument as well. Is this going to have any impact going forward on this whole issue?
Look, I don't think on whether the peninsula is going to be part of regional or metropolitan Victoria, but I think the issue of how we plan our green wedges fundamentally needs to change. The state government should be responsible for strategic planning of the green wedges, and it needs to bring together the special qualities of each of those wedges, and there are many of them, but also then looking at the particular land uses that can happen in those wedges and bring those two things together in an integrated way. And we haven't seen that happen thus far. Local government's very important to implementation and to making sure it happens. But the strategic decisions really need to be taken at state government level, as the Minister will be with the EES decision. And it's encouraging, I think, to the local community that that some light was seen with the AGL decision. It's very rare to have an environmental effects statement say no, the governmental response to it say no. It's usually we'll knock a little bit off what's proposed and you can go ahead. Well, that simply just continues the erosion of those biodiversity values. It doesn't protect them at all. So we take some heart from the AGL decision.
Well, as I said at the outset, three major issues down here. AGL was one, Ryman over on the old Ansett property, and of course Hillview and its aspirations at after seat. Associate Professor Janet Stanley and Professor John Stanley, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Rppfm. Just quickly before I let you go, what is the timeline? When will the Minister be making his decision and determination?
Well, we're not exactly told until just a couple of weeks before, so it's indeterminate at the moment, but we anticipate it'll be somewhere early next year.
Thank you so much indeed. Associate Professor Janet Stanley and Professor John Stanley, her husband, thank you both for joining us here on Rppfm Peninsula Talks. Please keep us apprised of what is going on. Obviously, in the local community, this is a very big issue. We'll be following it closely here at Rppfm. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brendon.
Rppfm across the Mornington Peninsula, your local radio station, 98.7, 98.3. We are designed to bring you to air the issues, the concerns, and the people. This is Rppfm. Stick around.